Your protagonist just survived an epic attack, saved the world, and got the love interest, but your story still feels flat. Here's the thing you probably don't want to hear. Having your character survive impossible odds or defeat the main villain doesn't make them a strong character. What makes them strong is something called agency, which is the invisible force that separates memorable protagonists from ones that suck. So let's talk about it. If you're new here, my name is Brianna and I post videos every Sunday that help you become a better writer. I also make easy to use writing workbooks that help you build and outline your novel from start to finish, so if you're interested, check them out in my Etsy shop Planner Palette Co, linked in the description below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. So what is a protagonist? They're not just the person who gets the most page time or whose name might be on the cover. The protagonist is the character who drives the story forward. They're the one whose decisions, actions, and internal conflicts create the momentum that push your plot from beginning to end. They're not just present for the action, they're the reason the action exists in the first place. If you removed your protagonist from the story entirely, would the plot still happen? If yes, then you might not actually have a protagonist, you might just have a witness. The word protagonist comes from ancient Greek theater, which literally means the first person. This is the person who stepped out from the chorus to engage in dialogue and drive the narrative forward. Even back then, they understood that protagonists had to be the engine of the story. Weak writing makes the protagonist someone that things happen to. That's backwards. A true protagonist is someone who makes things happen. A strong protagonist has three essential qualities that work together to create agency. First, they have clear goals, not vague wishes like, I want to be happy, but specific, concrete objectives that they're actively pursuing. Even if their goal changes throughout the story, they should always be moving towards something. And if they are switching from one goal to the next, it should be made clear by the narrative and the context. Second, and this is the important one, they make meaningful decisions. Not just choices that are convenient to the plot, they're decisions that reveal their character, create consequences, and push the story in new directions, even if it sways from the original outline. Most of your major plot points should happen because your protagonist chose to make it happen according to who they are as a person. Now, I want to note that your protagonist will most likely also face external circumstances that are out of their control or something happens to them. But in those situations, they're still going to respond by making choices, and those choices should still align with who they are and cause change. And third, they change through their own actions. One of the most important transformations in your story should be your protagonist grappling with challenges, making mistakes, learning from the consequences, and ultimately growing as a person, whether that's for the better or the worse. When these three elements work together, you get what we call character agency, which is the sense that the protagonist is the author of their own story. The problem is that even experienced writers accidentally strip their protagonists of agency without realizing it. Oftentimes, it's because they're not willing to let the plot or the story change as a result of their characters' choices. They have an outline that they stick to, even if the choices required to lead to those events don't align with the protagonist or other characters. Other times, it's just because the writer isn't aware to look out for the signs we're about to talk about. So let's talk about the 4 most common signs that your protagonist has become a passenger in their own story. The first sign is that things happen to them. This is the most common agency killer, and it's sneakier than you think. On the surface, your protagonist might seem active. They're running from explosions, fighting monsters, having intense conversations. But if you look closer, you'll realize that they're not actually driving any of those events. They're just reacting to them. A quick test for you would be to go through your major plot points and ask yourself, did my protagonist choose this, or make decisions that led to this, or did this choose them? If most of your plot points are things that happen to your protagonist instead of them making them happen, you've got a problem. For example, let's say your protagonist discovers they're the chosen one and gets kidnapped by the villain. They escape because the villain's servant takes pity on them and helps them escape through the sewers. Then they meet a wise mentor who unlocks their magical powers. Then the villain initiates the final battle, and the protagonist wins because all the supporting characters worked off-page to cripple the villain's resources or find something that would weaken him. Sure, the protagonist is physically present for all of these events, but they didn't initiate any of them. They're just a pinball getting knocked around the board. Readers want to experience someone actively fighting for what they want. You can't live vicariously through a passive protagonist because there's nothing to live vicariously through. You can fix this by giving your protagonist proactive goals at every stage of the story. Let's take the original example. If you want them to incidentally discover that they're the chosen one, have them find out because they were actively seeking something else, which led them to that discovery. Instead of having them kidnapped, have them choose to infiltrate the villain's lair for a reason relevant to their goals, and then fail by being found and captured. Maybe they were found because the villain's servant was being beaten up by a superior, and the protagonist chose to help them, allowing the servant to get away while getting themselves captured. and their choice to help them is what spurs the servant to help them escape through the sewers. Instead of the mentor giving them the means to unlock their powers, have the protagonist unlock those powers through sacrifice or through difficult choices or circumstances. Almost every major plot development should happen because your protagonist decided to pursue a goal, not because the plot decided to happen to them. The second sign is having a constant Deus ex machina rescue in your story. And this is where external forces are constantly solving the protagonist's problems for them. And I'm not just talking about the obvious stuff, like a character being saved by a random stranger at the last second. Modern Deus ex machina is often much more subtle. It might be a protagonist who's about to fail until they suddenly remember crucial information that conveniently solves everything. Or a character who's outmatched in a fight until their hidden powers mysteriously activate. Or someone who's facing an impossible choice until an outside event removes the need to choose. In all these events, resolution is served to the protagonist on a silver platter. The problem with constant external rescue isn't just that it feels convenient. It's that it trains readers to expect that your protagonist doesn't actually need to solve their own problems. Why should readers invest in watching someone struggle when they know that a solution is just going to appear when things get really bad? But the issue isn't that your protagonist needs help. That's completely fine. The issue is when they don't earn it or instigate it through a chain reaction. Even when external help arrives, your protagonist should be the one who made that help possible through previous choices and actions. If you're seeing this sign in your own writing, you can fix this by setting up your external solutions earlier in the story through your protagonist's proactive choices. If allies are going to save the day, your protagonist should be the one who earned their loyalty. If hidden powers are going to activate, your protagonist should have triggered that activation through their own growth or sacrifice or by taking measures to learn how to do it. If convenient information is going to appear, your protagonist should have put in the work to discover it. In general, the rule here is that external help should feel like a natural consequence of your protagonist's agency, not a substitute for it. Sign number 3 is having no meaningful internal conflict. Your protagonist might be driving the external plot perfectly, making active choices, solving problems, but if there's no meaningful internal struggle, they still lack agency in the most important sense. Internal conflict is more than just feeling sad or having trust issues. Meaningful internal conflict is when your protagonist is torn between two things they want, or when they want something that goes against who they think they are, or when achieving their goal requires them to become someone they're not sure they want to become. This internal struggle should create external choices that are genuinely difficult. Not difficult because the plot says so, but difficult because the protagonist's own psychology makes it so. For example, a protagonist who wants to save their family, but knows that doing so will require them to become the kind of person who unalives innocent people. Or a protagonist who wants to expose a truth but realizes that truth will destroy someone they love. These are plot problems and identity problems. When protagonists lack meaningful internal conflict, their choices become obvious and their growth becomes superficial. Readers can predict what they're going to do because there's no real psychological complexity driving their decisions. One way to fix this is to give your protagonist competing internal drives that create genuine moral or emotional dilemmas. And the best internal conflicts are when both sides of the dilemma are sympathetic and understandable. Your protagonist shouldn't just be choosing between good and evil. They should be choosing between two different versions of good, or between what they want and what they need, or between who they are and who they can become. Then make sure these internal struggles influence their external actions and decisions throughout the story. The fourth sign is that their goals are vague or non-existent. This one seems obvious, but it might surprise you how often I've seen in writing that protagonists just drift through the story without any clear objectives. And I'm not talking about the protagonist who clearly states that they don't know what they want, though that can be a problem too. I'm talking about the protagonist whose goals are so general or reactive that they might as well not have any goals at all. I want to survive. I want to be happy. I want to save the world. Might technically be a goal, but it's so abstract that it doesn't give your protagonist specific things to pursue. You have to break those down into actionable steps. If they want to survive, you have to think what it is they need to do in order to survive. Those are the goals they need to follow. If they want to be happy, you need to break down what it is they need to do in order to be happy. Maybe it's to get out of a bad home situation. Or maybe it's to reconnect with a loved one. What makes this tricky is that your protagonist can appear to have goals while not actually having goals. They might say they want to find their missing sister, but they never actually make proactive choices about how to find her. In that case, they don't really have a goal, they just have a wish. Real goals create specific actions. If your protagonist wants something concrete, they should be able to make plans, take steps, and measure progress towards achieving it like any real life goal. They should also be able to fail at it, like any real life goal. So if you're seeing the sign in your own writing, one way you can fix this is by giving your protagonist both a story goal and scene goals. The story goal is what they want to achieve by the end of the book. Scene goals are the specific things they're trying to accomplish in each individual scene that will help them reach their story goal. For example, if your story goal is expose the corrupt mayor, your scene goals might be get access to the mayor's office, convince the whistleblower to talk, and gather enough evidence to convince the newspaper editor. Each scene should have your protagonist actively working towards something specific, and each scene goal should logically connect to the larger story goal. Now let's talk about a fifth sign that is often overlooked because it's so ingrained in our culture that we don't even notice it. And that's the protagonist who constantly defers to others for action or direction. This shows up as protagonists who won't act until they get permission from an authority figure, or who consistently waits for others to tell them what to do next, or who define their entire journey by what other people need from them rather than what they want for themselves. The thing about this pattern is that it can look like character development. We tell ourselves that our protagonist is being humble or respectful or collaborative, but actually they're just not taking responsibility for their own story. And this can be more common in stories where the protagonist is part of a team or following a mentor. Yes, they might need to work with others, but they should also still be making independent choices about how to contribute to the group effort. One way that you can fix this is to make sure that your protagonist has moments where they're acting against advice, where they take initiative without being asked, or where they make decisions that others disagree with. Your protagonist should be collaborating by choice, not because they don't know how to act independently. The great thing, though, is that if you're finding your protagonist is like this, then you can make this a great part of their character development, where they're learning how to become more independent and disagree with others or make their own choices that might not align with others. So what does agency actually look like when it's working? A protagonist with agency doesn't just react to conflict. They create conflict through their choices. They don't just solve problems, they cause problems by pursuing their own goals. They don't just grow and change, they drive their own transformation by making decisions that force them to confront who they are. Most importantly, a protagonist with agency makes readers feel like they're witnessing someone taking control of their own destiny, even when that destiny is difficult or uncertain. Think about Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. She's not a warrior or a chosen one, but she has incredible agency. She actively forms opinions about the people around her. She makes choices about who to trust and who to reject, and she pursues her own definitions of happiness even when it goes against societal expectations. Every major plot development happens because Elizabeth chose to act according to her own judgment. Or look at Walter White from Breaking Bad. He's technically the villain of his own story, but he also has strong agency. He decides what his cancer diagnosis means and what he's going to do about it. Every escalation in the series happens because Walter chose to prioritize his own goals over other people's well-being. The thing is that creating characters with agency is actually unexpectedly hard. In real life, most of us spend most of our time reacting to circumstances beyond our control. We go to work because we have to, not because we chose it as part of some grand plan or destiny. We deal with problems that other people create. We make compromises and accommodations to try to get along. But fiction isn't real life. In fictions, readers want to experience what it feels like to be someone who actively shapes their own world rather than just surviving in it. That's a completely different psychology than what most of us live with daily. So when we sit down to write our protagonists, we default to that reactive mindset that dominates our actual life experience. We create characters who respond to their circumstances in realistic or relatable ways, but realistic and relatable doesn't always make for compelling fiction, unless you're writing something like literary fiction. That said, don't make your protagonists unrealistic, but put them in situations where proactive choice becomes necessary for survival, success, or growth. So here's your homework. Go through your current work in progress and identify every major plot point. For each one, ask yourself, did my protagonist choose this or did this choose them? If more than half of your plot points are things that happen to your protagonist, you need to revise. Start by giving your protagonist a specific, concrete, overarching story goal that requires them to take proactive action that they need to achieve by the end of the story. Then list out everything they need to do to make that goal happen. No matter how small, everything you can think of, do it in a bullet list or a mind map, or actually a flowchart might work better for this. You can start from the story goal and work your way backwards, or vice versa. But map out the actions your protagonist needs to take in order to achieve this story goal, and then connect them sequentially. For each major action that would significantly progress them towards that goal, assign that to your protagonist. They're the one who has to accomplish that step. And for other smaller or minor tasks, you can assign those to supporting characters. Once you've done that, then restructure your plot so that each major development happens because your protagonist chose to pursue that goal. Now, you can obviously tweak the assignments and assignees depending on who they are as characters. Maybe you realize down the road that one character is better for this task than another, but the point is that now you have an agency roadmap to follow. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, you might want to watch this one next. And I'd love to hear in the comments what's the biggest agency problem you've noticed in your own writing. Until the next chapter.